Welcome to today's panel on leading tech talent. We're excited to get to the conversation, but we have a couple of housekeeping things that we need to get started. The sound for today's presentation should come from your computer, not from a dial-in. So if you run into any problems, please send a message into the Q&A box and we'll look into them. Refreshing your browser and rejoining the presentation will usually resolve most issues. We'll answer questions towards the end of today's presentation. To submit your question, click the question mark on the right side of your screen. And yes, we are recording, so we'll share the recording with everyone in a day or two. Now, managing tech teams is easy, but leading them is difficult. In today's ultra-competitive environment, you need your tech teams to be on top of their game, both in output and in innovation. Tech talent is a differentiator in most industries, but hiring talented people on the team is only part of the puzzle. Leaders need to foster growth with a psychologically safe environment and rally their teams around common goals. So how does a leader create a space for their teams to thrive? Today, we're talking with 3 veteran engineering leaders to break down their approach and help their teams grow. And Dragana Hadjic is an agile coach and a consultant and a senior manager with Levi 9. And Dragana, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone. As Jeremy mentioned, my name is Dragana Hadjic, and I'm a consultant. Most of my career, I've been actually helping teams and organizations to succeed in their goals. So this is something that I'm really passionate about. I'm originally also coming from a software engineering background, but most of my career I was working in a role of agile coach, leader of management teams, project and delivery manager. And yes, I'm also a Pluralsight author, and I have my blog about Scrum, and yeah, that's in short about me.
Awesome. Then we have Michael Rasmussen, who's a VP of Engineering at Sling TV.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me on. So yeah, I'm VP of Engineering at Sling. We have about 3 million subscribers to our live TV service. I run a team of about 200 engineers, Scrum Masters, product owners, product managers, and we are currently going through a really difficult transformation from feature teams to empowered product teams, and really having kind of full cross-functional ownership of the entire value stream. It's a lot of hard work, but I think we're making some good progress. My previous background is actually mostly in the game industry. I worked for companies like EA and Zynga, and led transformations like this there. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. And Spencer Gardner is a co-founder and VP of Engineering at Tava Health. And would you like to introduce yourself, Spencer?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks again for having me on. I wish I was a Pluralsight author. That's one of my new goals, Dragana, so thanks for setting the standard. Spencer Gardner, I started Tava Health about a year ago with a couple co-founders, and we're an online mental health network that we sell as a benefit to employers to provide to their employees. Super passionate about how mental health affects all of us in our daily lives. It's a rising crisis that's it's really affecting everyone in this world, I feel like, and there's lots of statistics to back that up. So it's just been an awesome experience starting this company, building it from the ground up, and kind of connecting technology with helping people with their mental health. Before that, I was at Artemis Health, one of the early people there, leading the product engineering team, and had a great experience taking that business quite a ways, and it's doing pretty well. And then I had some brief stints at Microsoft and doing some user experience design at Rain Agency, and a competitive distance runner, and so that's something that keeps me going during the day.
Awesome. So for our first question, and anyone can answer this, whoever likes, what does fostering growth mean to you?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think that fostering growth to me means really kind of unlocking the potential of your team, in particular engineers. There's quite a lot of data to show that some of the best insights and innovations actually come from engineers, those that are closest to the problems that we're trying to solve. And all too often, engineering teams are feature teams. The highest paid person comes up with a list of things that they want done, and then we have to somehow figure out how to fit that into the capacity. that is fundamentally the wrong way to run things. And I think that the right way to run things and the right way to foster growth is to unleash the potential of the teams, of the folks that are closest to the problems.
Okay, and how do you foster an ownership mentality among everyone so to really get people engaged and involved?
Well, I can take this one. So I think that basically ownership mentality is there if people are motivated, if they have the goals that are clear to them, that they buy the goals, and that they also have some personal, let's say, interest in achieving those goals. And not from the interest perspective, but that they have a wish that these goals are achieved. So basically, depending on how much ownership is there, people are getting motivated. It's very important factor in people motivation. So I think once we have motivation in place, that basically everything is about transparency and making enough space for people to work. And when they have this opportunity, then they will basically be triggered by that, and they will achieve the goals themselves. Actually, when we don't have this element in place, then we need to think more about how to establish authority. But personally, in my opinion, I'm always more for the approach to basically develop the culture where we have ownership mentality rather than establishing some more traditional, let's say, authority measures in company.
And I'll just add on to that as well, that especially with my background and spending lots of time in younger, more scrappy sort of situations with startups, focusing on vision and mission first. Like, what is the kernel of this business? What are we getting at? And in my case right now, it's improving people's mental health, which that's a kind of an easy thing, I feel like, for people to relate with and to start taking ownership of in their day-to-day engineering or product development. It might not always be as altruistic. It might be improving some business software. It might be trying to streamline other parts of someone's workflow. But at the same time, I think that, again, coming back to the core foundational aspects of why the business was founded and what the mission really is, can really help people to find ownership in a way that makes sense to them. And if they're not aligned with that, it's going to be hard to align them with really anything in the business.
And if I may comment on that as well, because I think the ownership piece is so important. I think that having everybody on the team have a very clear focus, and a focus is not priority. Priority is a list of things. A focus is like, there are 2 to 3 things that we are focused on, and these are the outcomes that we really want to drive. That is where you can unlock ownership. I don't think you get ownership when you say, here's our list of 80 things. They're stack ranked, so you know the priority. That doesn't drive ownership. Ownership is around outcomes, not output. And so I think it is actually on the leaders. I think it's easy to say, hey, we need our teams to have ownership. But if there's an ownership problem, it's a management and a leadership problem. It's usually not the problem of the folks on the team. Most of them want ownership. And it's actually, we have to put the structure in place and the alignment around the outcomes in place to have ownership. Otherwise, it won't happen. It can't happen.
Yes, I fully agree that all people want to have ownership. All people want to have purpose of their work. They want to get engaged. So yes, we just need to enable them to do that.
And are there different approaches at different sizes of organizations? So if you're trying to get your group to focus on the why, like I said, focus on the outcomes, is that a different approach, say if you're a large company, a large organization, between a small startup?
Yeah, it's really interesting to ask that question. So my career started at Microsoft, and then it transitioned really quickly into at the very beginning stages of a startup. And that was a really interesting transition that I will say did come with some implications in terms of understanding what the mission of the company was, understanding what the goals really were. And actually, one of the reasons that I felt personally like it was difficult for me in the current team I was at Microsoft was because I didn't feel like I had a a clear path towards achieving some real objective that I felt like I could really change. And I don't think that's necessarily true for Microsoft as a whole, or big companies as a whole. But in my particular situation, that was the case. But then transitioning right into Artemis Health, they gave me a laptop and said, "Hey, this is what we're trying to solve. Here's a laptop. Let's go do it." And that was immediately clear. And I almost had immediate ownership. If I didn't perform, then the company wouldn't exist, pretty much. And I think fostering that sort of idea amongst employees, even in a medium-sized business or large business, I think is really effective.
I think conceptually it's the same. I think in practice, it's a lot more difficult the larger organization you have to scale that, because what you're really trying to capture is that two-pizza team feel of a startup. You know, and I've been in a startup, and it's really, really easy to have that alignment, because you're all sitting right next to each other and you're saying, hey, this is our goal, and it's on the wall. And ultimately, that's exactly what you're trying to recreate at a larger organization, is that alignment and that ownership and kind of the scale of the teams where they're the right size that they can move quickly. So there's a lot of, I think, approaches on how to do that at a larger organization. But ultimately, you're trying to recreate that same feeling that you have at a startup.
Yes, basically, I think in a startup, it comes naturally. So everyone is aware of what we want to achieve. We are all part of this. We are just doing it together. And in a larger organization, you just need to put some mechanism, or to introduce some effort into basically aligning everyone individual contribution to the bigger picture. But there are some very successful mechanisms for that. So I don't think there are obstacles. It's just about different way to organize things.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you define as uncomfortable conditions for engineers in your organization?
Take it away.
Yeah, so I think uncomfortable, we're going through a lot of change right now. And I think uncomfortable conditions happen when you're not taking advantage of your engineering talent. I think the way that things ran when I got here, for example, was that Jira basically ran our business. An engineer would come in on a given day, and he'd go and see what tickets were assigned to him, and it was a very mercenary attitude. And engineers don't like working like that. Engineers like being missionaries. They like understanding the vision. They like understanding where they're going. So I think anytime you're working in a feature factory or like a mercenary type organization, you have to put in a whole bunch of other things to kind of manage people and get them excited and get them motivated. You can unlock their intrinsic motivations by making it a missionary organization, and by aligning them with outcomes rather than output.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So basically being like a firefighter that's always solving problems, things like that, that kind of stress can lead up to making things uncomfortable, if I'm understanding correctly. But if you get them building features and doing things that are improving the business and trying to improve that mix, does that help make things a little less?
Let me kind of just further thoughts there. You know, I think we have, for example, we have a lot of production burden. So we have 3 million subscribers. We have to keep the lights on. There's a lot of work involved in keeping the systems up and running. They're very complex. They're a distributed system. It's a non-trivial problem. And so, there's just sort of that baseline level of thing that has to happen. In addition to that, we have to find a way to prioritize new features and innovation. And that just it's a constant ongoing battle. And I think we have to be in a position where we invest in the infrastructure and we invest in the technology that allows us to move more quickly. And going through that transition, it's hard. It's really hard on an engineering team.
And so when you have, go ahead, Spencer. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Jeremy. You keep on going. It's great.
Okay. When you have disruptive changes on the horizon, how do you guys prepare your teams for those changes? So I know a lot of times, like the digital transformation, it seems like it's happening everywhere. There's digital transformation and then there's culture transformations that kind of happen at the same time. as organizations are moving from, on-prem to the cloud, or they're moving to a mobile app instead of a traditional desktop app, or things like that. So how do you prepare your team to address those drastic changes?
I think that a really practical thing that I've done in the past is having hack days. That's getting really specific really quick, but I think that it's on the mind of most of the engineers in the organization. I know it's on my mind every day. I'm thinking about what's coming up next, what the new challenges are, what the new tech is, and you read about it, on your Twitter feed, or wherever you are, in your Y Combinator feed, whatever, and you see these technologies coming through, and everyone's kind of talking about them, but maybe doesn't have any experience using them. And so one of the just really practical mechanisms that I've used is just having a hack day or a couple days where engineers can take a business-oriented problem and then try to match it with some new disruptive technology or some new approach to solving that issue, just to kind of build the confidence and to get a little bit of that experience with that new concept. That's more on a practical level. There's also larger, disruptive things that are happening that you wouldn't necessarily have a hack day for. But that's just one idea. I think without having to invest a ton and without having to commit to something long term, you can just spend a couple days looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it seems like, from my experience in tech leadership, there's always certain types of people on the team, and there's usually one person that's very resistant to change and technology. And generally, that's the person that's been around the longest and knows the most about the system. So you can't discount their opinion, and they're like, well, why are we chasing this new fad, and why are we chasing the new thing? And so I found the hack days, or just the let's sit down with Angular for today and build something together type of thing, helps a lot to kind of break down those barriers and help people see, this is why we're changing to this new thing. Because you usually have one person on the team that wants to do all the latest and greatest things, and then one person on the team that's like, why are we changing what we're doing now?
Right.
So.
And if you're at the point where you've decided we need to make the change, there's quite a few frameworks out there for managing change, but they're all some variant of starting with awareness. Like, hey, this is why we're, starting with the why. This is why we're going to do this. Then moving to knowledge, or this is how we're going to do this, and then moving to the ability of, this is what we're going to do. We recently did a big DevOps transformation, and at the same time, we're transitioning an old monolithic system to microservices. And it was, there's no way we could have done this in one single hit. We had to have this kind of constant heartbeat of starting with the awareness, this is why we're doing it, and then moving to the knowledge, okay, we want to enable everybody and help them get the skills necessary and develop those skills, and then we can map out how we actually do this. And in some instances that it takes a little bit more time, in particular with a large organization, to go through that kind of change.
So how much runway do you give your team to shape the approach taken with the disruptive technology as it comes in, like for a DevOps transformation, for instance?
Yeah, so I can speak to DevOps. The unfortunate reality is that it in some of these transformations it takes years. With larger organizations it can take years, but I think that there's some quick things you can do right away. So if you've got a system that's legacy like ours, and you're trying to completely automate the CI/CD pipeline, that's a lot of work. It's going to take a long time. But what you can do is you can start changing the mentality and the culture right away, and shifting left on things like QA and ops, and starting to integrate those teams, and say, hey, we have to solve these problems together. We don't get to throw this over the wall anymore. We're breaking down silos, and this is our goal. This is where we ultimately want to go. So it kind of goes back to that same thing. We have to articulate this goal. Like, this is where we want to go. This is how we're going to measure it. And then we're going to start to give you the knowledge and the ability and the training and everything necessary to actually drive in that direction.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what the uncomfortable situation is, and what is the current state of your teams. But maybe it sounds too simple, but I think in general, we should give no more or no less time than it is actually needed to make things right, you know. So for example, I work with a lot of agile teams, and in normal circumstances, what I'm looking as one of the metrics is focus factor. And I think when everything is normal, when people are productive, but then I'm looking that they need approximately 80% of the time to work on their current tasks, and then 20% for meetings, emails, or whatever is needed. So this is something that is like a standard when everything is okay. But with any small change, it can simply, you know, people can lose focus with additional 20% or something. And if we are talking about big change, it's completely different. So I think however time is needed, no more or no less than we actually need to make things work. So
So how do you keep your team motivated and hungry for new things?
I'll speak to that just to start off with. I think maybe just a couple of specific examples. I think we could talk broadly too, but I think in general, it's really important to focus on small wins. It's very important that you don't celebrate only at the very end of a big project or big initiative. If you do that, then chances are that people will be burnt out by the end of it, or you might not even get there. So one popular idea that sales teams have is that sales gong that they'll use sometimes when they make a big sale. So I had a small gong that I got, and you know, on small releases or small updates, we kind of when we shipped the update, we would hit the gong, and that was just the principle of it was celebrating that next step towards success, and it was something that was kind of wonky, kind of funny, but also did help the team to rally around something and celebrate a little bit. Another thing at Tava that we do is, you know, as important milestones in our business come up with patient volume and with people and patients seeing therapists at a certain volume, then I've actually written some code that will actually notify us in Slack when good things happen on our system. Super small, but again, during the day when you get that Slack notification that notifies you of a win for the business, that really helps keep people going.
that sounds fun.
Yeah, so like
I think in general, these small wins are really important. I think there are two dimensions. We need to keep an eye on small things. So this is what, you know, what is our everyday work. And from the other side, we need always to have this big why we are doing it, what is the big goal, as Michael mentioned earlier. So this why, or like long-term goal, is very important also for teams.
Yep. What's the difference between communicating company goals and objectives versus having them focus on the why?
So I think if you do it right, there is no difference. You know, so we're actually rolling out OKRs, which I actually don't think OKRs are a great methodology for aligning unless you actually have empowered product teams, and the OKRs aren't going through managers, but they're going through product, and you have very active managers. Otherwise, I think it's actually kind of distracting. But I think if you do a really good job of company goals, then that is the why, and that is and it all ties up to, you know. So for us, we have a product, we have a mission for the company. We have a product vision, which gets at one additional level of granularity down that very clearly states this is where we want our product to be 5 years from now. Then we have OKRs, which are here's what we're going to focus on in the next 1 to 2 years, that are very, very why focused. Like we want to have better engagement with our watchers for X reason, and why, because it leads to this. So, you know, so they're very focused on the why. And then every team has their OKRs that ladder up to those OKRs. So I think that's really, really hard to do. But I think if you do that, then the why and the goals are the same.
I think it's a bit also about wording, and communicating is also fine. This is perfect. But for me, when I say just communicate, it initially sounds as, one-way street. So you inform people or communicate this to them. And when I think about alignment, then I think about bringing everyone into agreement. And even if these are like bigger goals, long-term goals, I think that people can still develop the sense of ownership if they can. For example, if you have an objective and then a person has an idea about initiative, how they can contribute to the objective, they're already building the ownership. And then when we build this together, I think it's really alignment. This is, yeah, the real thing. But as I mentioned, it's also about wording. Communicating is also fine. I mean, yeah.
And so who should create the OKRs? Should that be the engineers, leadership, or kind of a combination of the two?
So there's some very clear best practices around OKRs, and I've unfortunately been at companies where they have OKRs and they're actually pretty unhealthy. I think OKRs should be done with engineering and product together, and they should be aligned around product teams, not managers. So for example, I've been to places where my boss has an OKR and then I have an OKR, but some people on my team are on product teams, and then it's like, which OKR are you actually? And I think that's a mess. I think the way to do it is have, for your overall business, have OKRs, and then each product team, which is focused on some sort of vertical experience, they have OKRs, and those teams may be composed of people from different departments, but it can very quickly mushroom into something that's confusing and actually detrimental. So I think you have to have a lot of discipline to do it right.
Yeah, sure. You should keep it simple. I think with OKRs, I think they're fine, but basically they are just a way to achieve the alignment and to bring everyone together to the same goal. So it's one technique. Sometimes with teams I use a very simple technique that is impact mapping. So it has some similar elements to OKR. So I find that sometimes it works, but as I mentioned, I think those are only, let's say, techniques. It's important what we want to achieve. We want to bring everyone together, heading in the same direction with the feeling of ownership. So, yeah.
Okay. And how do you align separate departments and divisions? Like you were talking about, like with product and engineering, how do you align those together if they're, fairly siloed in nature? How do you get them aligned and kind of moving towards the same set of goals?
Well, I think there is a structure and a culture there. So looking at the structure, for example, in the environment where I work, so we have departments, but we also work as agile cross-functional teams where different people from different departments are in agile teams. So in that way, they all have a common goal and they have a collective accountability to deliver something. So it's basically one mechanism of alignment between different departments. And then when talking about company culture, it's about growing the values of openness, transparency, about, simple things as Spencer mentioned, hackathons, knowledge sharing groups, presentations, everything that brings people together around some common goals. So, and to encourage that kind of behavior.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'd also add just finding some way to foster empathy amongst departments. And that sounds a little bit weird because a department having an empathy for another department is kind of an interesting abstract concept. But yeah, oftentimes I find that, yeah, it's just from a manager of a department to the manager of another department, like that empathy sometimes isn't there, that communication isn't there. And I think that's a very common misstep, is just to not communicate, not understand what the issues of that other department is dealing with. And then, yeah, just to second what Dragana said, I think once you understand that those issues and you have the empathy for the other department, or there's interdepartmental empathy that's built, then you can start looking at, oh, what projects can we do together? How can we help each other, even in a small capacity to start with? And it starts a flywheel, I think, of productivity and communication within the business. And I don't know about the rest of you. I just really dislike the culture of one department sometimes having a competition with the other. That tends to happen sometimes. Sometimes engineers will complain that salespeople are selling ahead of the engineers or the product people. And sometimes the salespeople will complain that the engineers or product people aren't quite fast enough. And I think it's just really toxic to a culture. And I've seen that in lots of different places. And I think that, again, yeah, coming back to empathy, understanding the issues, and then working together instead of trying to work in kind of orthogonally, then things go a lot better.
Yeah, at my last gig, I was actually VP of product, not VP of engineering. So I think that the kind of product and engineering, it's absolutely critical that they work together. And I think the best way to do that is with cross-functional teams
Yep.
that are fully cross-functional, that actually do own the entire value chain. So that includes product design, engineering, QA, ops. It includes all of the departments. And then really the departments are just sort of the HR management of those teams, but that's where the actual work happens, is on those cross-functional teams. And if they truly are empowered and they're truly aligned with OKRs or impact mapping or whatever you use to kind of align on the objectives, then I think that's when the magic happens, because I think then they move really, really quickly. And there's a lot of things that have to be in place as well. You have to have a platform that can support that from a technology standpoint, and you have to have the right processes in place. It's really 4 things: it's processes and procedures, it's culture, it's the org structure, and it's technology. And you have to have all 4 of them for it to work.
And what kind of changes have you folks seen over the years in things like that, like procedures and org structures and things like that? I know personally I've seen a pretty drastic difference even in the last 10 years of how organizations that I've been with are set up. What are some kind of big changes that you folks have seen?
So I started my career a long time ago before Agile. So when I was a software engineer, we would do completely like comprehensive design documentation. So the design process actually happened in this huge chunk before we wrote any software. And then we would go in a very waterfall manner and then write the software, and then go and so I think the lead time from an idea to when it actually hit customers was years. So I think ultimately it's all been about shrinking that lead time. And then I've seen people that implement Agile, but it's more Agile fall. It's actually, they're still just doing waterfall, but they have Scrum and they have stand-ups, and they're not actually doing quick iterations on that whole design, build, release, measure cycle. They're actually just doing what they used to do, but they're calling it something different. And I think the real transformation is when you truly do move into Agile teams, truly cross-functional teams that truly do own the entire value chain. And they go from releasing, a couple times a year to releasing multiple times a day. And I think that transformation, which you can call DevOps, which you can call Agile, is I think the biggest transformation that I've seen.
Yes, I recognize what you're saying, Michael. So I was also working as a software engineer in more traditional setting. I was also working as a project manager in a more traditional setting, and then moved to Agile, etc. And the main difference that I see is that way back then it was more focused on processes, and now it's more focused on the value, which is really great, on the outcomes. So I think it's a big step forward.
Awesome. So,
if implemented, I think a lot of companies say that, but don't actually do it.
I see really more and more really that people are really focusing on value and outcomes. I think it's just what is coming. So everything is becoming more complex, faster, technology is advanced, etc. So it's just, I think, is necessity. So I really see that in more and more environments, really people are focused on value.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think showing value is probably the easiest way to get adoption. I was a software engineer when Agile first started really becoming popular in groups, and people were very slow to adapt to it. I was also in the waterfall type groups, where we'd do a deploy every 6 months. And as soon as the results started showing up from changing certain processes, that's when the resistors were like, okay, there may be something here.
And I would say there's actually ongoing transformation that needs to happen. I think Agile in some ways has actually made some problems worse. There are teams that are really good at churning out a whole bunch of features. Have they actually aligned those features with customers? Are they actually doing customer discovery? Or are they just executing on a list of whatever the highest person told them to do?
Yes, so I think this is also the next thing. So what I see is that most of companies are now really good at agile processes, delivery processes. So teams are working in an agile manner, etc. But now where focus is shifting more to product side. So also to make the planning agile, also to make to validate assumptions, to basically update the goals and to adjust the goals according to what is going on in the world. So I think that focus is shifting there definitely, and it's a really good thing.
So,
and I'd also just add from a management perspective, I think more is required. Well, maybe not more, but a different sort of set of skills is required of managers now than was maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Needs to be a little bit more dynamic, needs to be a little less, I'm a cog in a big machine and I will just do my thing and churn through the waterfall of tasks. It really does require thinking differently as a manager. And I think that's where, like, there's no silver bullet, of course. There's lots of things online. I'm sure Dragan knows all sorts about this. Lots of discussion online about, is agile a silver bullet? And this kind of conversation about what's the silver bullet, and of course there is none, right? It's merely an approach, but it is one that seems to be popularized among the community right now, and we're learning a lot as an industry about how it is helping us. But of course, on top of that, the cherry on top as a manager is you need to understand the core principles of business and of what you're doing and why you're doing it first, and then apply the agile methodology, for example, to be productive.
Yeah, so when building teams and putting together teams, what are some specific traits that you're looking for in your team members?
I'll just jump in first. Obviously, pretty big topic, right? And we could talk probably for a couple days or weeks about it. But one of my favorite things that I saw recently, well, it was about a year ago, but it was a tweet, and it said, "Culture add is greater than culture fit." And you could agree or disagree with it, but I saw it and I really loved it, because for so many years, that's been part of the conversation with hiring. Okay, do they fit our culture? Do they fit our culture? And I think it's not an either or sort of thing, of course, but I really liked switching my hiring decisions and thinking about how to build a team and who to bring on in terms of how do they add to my culture? What do they bring to the table that's going to change things up in a way that's really great? And if you don't have a specific reason for adding that person, if it's just to add to your headcount to fill a quota that the business from a top-down level has allocated to you, then maybe you should think twice about what's happening. But if you can find a reason, a culture add reason for hiring that person, then I think it's a good hire.
I look at several things, and I think culture is a huge one. I look at kind of general cognitive ability. How smart are they? Are they going to be able to solve difficult problems? Their ability to do the actual job in question, which is, I think, secondary to most of the others. Leadership ability, which I think is a huge one. Because we're putting people in really difficult situations where they have to lead their teams through it, and then just kind of, like I said, like Spencer said, the culture. Are they going to be missionaries? Are they going to kind of go after this, taking this hill and drive themselves and those around them to actually do that? I think that's often, that passion is more important. In fact, I'll take people that have that passion, even if they're a little bit lacking in their ability to do the job, because I trust that they'll be able to figure that piece out.
Mm. Yeah, so cultural aspect for me is also the most important, cultural add or cultural fit. So both, but I think this part is really what makes the difference. Of course, we need to have some skills in place, etc. But for me, it's more important that person has awareness about their ability to learn, and that they want to learn. So this is very important one for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's more of a mission fit over a cultural fit, is basically what you guys are saying. And so that's one of the things that we follow here at Pluralsight also is the passion and the mission and where people are directed is more important than anything else. So that's pretty cool
Definitely.
to hear. So how do you guys balance and prioritize things like learning time for your teams? So obviously in technical positions, there's a ton of technical things that need to be learned and mastered yesterday. So how do you balance that out with, time actually working? Like Dragana, you mentioned that 80%, work and 20% meetings. What part of that percentage should be learning time for learning new skills?
What I think that learning is in those 80%. So the only thing for me, this works is if I treat learning time as any other working tasks on, planning horizon. So basically, as you mentioned, if I'm deciding today whether somebody is going to learn something or deliver something concrete, some feature that is needed for the deadline, always the second thing will win. So basically, I think it's much more easier to plan, to negotiate, and to prioritize learning activities if we do it from the long-term perspective. So do it in time, get buying of people who are deciding about prioritization, get those priorities listed, and then to treat it as any other working task. Because if we don't do so, then of course we are creating other kind of problem. Yeah.
What's interesting is that nobody on my team has hit the boundary yet. I want them to push for more. I've never turned down any request for learning or for training or for expanding horizons. I actually think that at least on my team, I'm not seeing enough of it. I think people should ask for more. For example, we did a test-driven development training, and several engineers came and said, we want to do a hackathon to figure out how we can transition to test-driven development. And I was all for it and said, hey, all the rest of the teams, let's all do this. And anybody that came to me and asked, I was more than happy to do that. I think I want teams to be passionate about learning and improving.
Yes, so I think everyone wants that, and I think that we have industry that we are working in is basically, we are very lucky because people are very curious, they want to learn. At least this is my experience in my whole career. Most of people I worked with, they wanted to learn new things, they wanted to implement new things. They are sometimes motivated just by technology, so this is, I think, in my experience, I've never felt this is lacking. So basically then it's about just fitting it in with some regular delivery stuff,
Yeah.
Awesome. So how do you create a psychologically safe workplace? Now, this is something that I know has been brought up a lot over the last few years. And it's kind of part of the DevOps thing, if you will. But how do you create a psychologically safe workplace where people feel safe to be honest with each other?
I think it ultimately comes down to vulnerability. So I think we need to model that behavior, and we need to own. For example, we're going through this transformation, and there's been a couple times when I've stood up in front of the team and said, you know what, we got this wrong. I got this wrong. I thought that this was going to turn out like this, and it didn't, and I'm going to own that. But we're iterating to success together, and that's okay. It's okay that I got it wrong, because this is what we learned, and everybody needs to know that we're going to fail. It's just the nature of it. But if we learn from that failure and move forward, then that's how we get to our best place. And the converse of that, where you're trying to find blame, absolutely kills psychological safety. And then nobody wants to take any sort of risk. So yeah, I think I think vulnerability is the key.
Yeah, well, I think, Michael, you really covered most important things. So it's basically, I would describe it as shifting the focus from the execution to learning. So we, of course, do the execution, but as if we fail, this is fine, as long as we learn from failure. So I think this is the key. And I think it's also important that we as leaders also show our own mistakes, to openly share this, because it just encourages everyone else do the same. And it's also about just simple conversation, ask people, talk to people, actively listen. So when people feel this kind of atmosphere, then they will also feel this safety.
Yeah, I seriously just love what's been shared. Brene Brown, I don't know if you've heard of that author, but maybe Michael has, but talks all about vulnerability, and it's just something me and my wife talk about this all the time in a business context, in a personal context. Really great principles. Just to add on to that, I mean, our company, Tava, literally we sell a mental health benefit to employers to give to their employees for people that are struggling, and it's totally free for the employees, right? And it's just becoming more and more clear the longer I spend in this company that just everybody has something going on, and this is a little bit more of a personal, kind of approach. But as a manager, whether it's managing several teams or just managing a small team, whatever, I think it's important to understand those facts, and to understand that statistically, someone on your team, including yourself, is probably dealing with something, whether it be family or work stress or anything like that, that they should probably get some help for. And I think a specific example of what I've tried to do with my teams is with our one-on-ones. I'm a huge believer, and maybe Michael and Dragana have different opinions, but I'm a big believer in focusing on people instead of projects during one-on-ones. My least favorite one-on-ones ever, when I was kind of on the receiving end of them, was when we just talked about the business the whole time. What projects are you working on? How's it going? Are you going to deliver it? Yes or no? So when I had the opportunity to start managing teams, I flipped it, and I really just focused on the individual, and I communicated specifically that I'm here to talk about how you're doing at work, and love to hear about it. We don't have to talk about projects at all, and it's fine if it came up. But that led to some really, really beneficial conversations, I think, for both parties, and started to help build real friendships, honestly, at work. And I think that's what people need. If you're spending most of your waking hours in a professional environment, you should probably have some personal connections with people that are meaningful. So I think that can really help on the psychological safety front.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up for questions from our group here. And looks like we have one here already. There we go. Okay, and I've got a question about Scrum teams. Who wants to answer? So when a Scrum team has contributors from different managers, how do you increase or drive the motivation of team members specific to one department that's a bottleneck of the team? For example, if Dev isn't producing when QA and BA are ahead and waiting.
So just to understand the question, we have a Scrum team, we have different departments, and only a portion of Scrum team is from a department that is bottleneck, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it sounds like one department's a bottleneck for the team.
Yeah, I think the best way to do this is what we've been talking about with ownership. If these are Scrum teams in name only, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot to begin with, and frankly, it's not going to be successful. But if they're actual Scrum teams where the engineers, the QA, and they're all aligned around one common goal, and that's their focus and that's their job, then it actually becomes pretty clear pretty quickly. Hey, we got a bottleneck with engineering, or we have a bottleneck with QA, and then and then I think you need to work those out together. If it's a resource issue, then you need to have that conversation with, hey, we just really need more engineers. If it's a performance issue, then then you have to have those hard conversations, and you have to, and that's kind of the flip side of vulnerability. Like you have to own your part, but then you also have to own what everybody else is doing, and ensuring that they understand what the expectations are.
Yeah.
So kind of talking behind their back, or just smack talking engineering, like, oh man, they never deliver, or product never gives us the requirements.
Yeah.
That's not going to solve it.
I think that really the beauty of Scrum teams is this collective ownership. What I would do in this situation, so this is definitely something that is not a particular issue of these persons from a bottleneck department, but this is something to be discussed within the team, and this is something to be brought to retrospective. And luckily, those people who are in the team already know the solution. You just need to let them, to emerge the solution. So when team comes with some collective finding about what is the best way to deal with this problem, then I think this should be definitely propagated to appropriate manager of a department or whatever, in case solution is related to that department. Maybe solution is completely different. Maybe it's just that the process needs to be adjusted a bit, or, so it can be a lot of different things. But if needs to be communicated also within the department and the person who is responsible for this, then this is also a way to go. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome.
And I think that retrospective idea is key. It's not about finding blame. It's not about, oh, the engineers suck or whatever else. It's okay, what is the problem? We're not trying to point fingers. We're just trying to identify the problem and learn from it. And any team that does that over and over again will fix the problems.
Awesome. And one thing that I've seen in the past that's worked well is having liaisons on teams. So you would have somebody from another team come to your stand-up, say once a week. So we have 5 stand-ups a week. And one day a week, we'd have someone from database engineering. One day we'd have someone from graphic design. One day we'd have someone from product. And each of those people would sit in our stand-up and just kind of listen. It's kind of the pigs and chickens thing, where they would just be an observer. They wouldn't take part in any of the ceremonies, but just kind of take it in. And then, I would go to another team and take it in. And after a while, that ownership starts to kind of inherently develop, to where people are like, no, I hung out with those product teams and they're struggling with this and this and this. Maybe here's a way we can help. Is that something that you folks have seen also?
Yes, I've seen this a lot. I've seen something like this also, because somehow Scrum Masters are always mostly oriented towards the making things work and towards the process, etc. What we also sometimes do is that my colleagues are shifting, also coming to stand up of different team, etc. Just somebody who is completely, from different context comes and sometimes instantly can see something that the team is struggling with or something like that. But also in some scaling environments, we go even a step further. For example, in a less environment, you have a concept of travelers, where people actually, you borrow a team member from another team for one iteration or 2 iterations or something like that. And then basically you can have their feedback, you can learn some additional things that maybe you do not have enough competence in your team to do that, but then you gain that knowledge, etc. So there are some nice mechanisms around it.
Very nice.
I think there's also a reason why the most successful teams are small 2-pizza teams, and they're co-located, just because of the way human beings are. If we know the person, it's very, if we don't know the person, it's easy to revert to us versus them. And ultimately, most team issues are people issues. And if you're just the very act of being co-located and actually knowing the person and actually caring about that person as a person, I think that's 70% of the battle to make a team successful. And it's really easy if they're in a different location and you don't actually know them and you've never met them. It's easy to think that they suck in some way, or that they're not giving you what you need, when it's usually actually not the case at all.
But what I do when I work with distributed teams, so I almost always from time to time bring people together, so people just travel to the same location and then spend maybe one iteration, or let's say quarterly they meet for the release planning or something, and then you have this bond developed that it's much smoother later to work, online.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question, this will be a fun one. What's your opinion of the impact of the human aspects of machine learning and automation becoming more important? How does an organization deal with this from a culture perspective?
Well, I can speak to automation, and machine learning. We're doing quite a lot there. I view automation and machine learning as freeing up the humans to do the interesting work. So I've got a large QA team. I want them to do qualitative testing. I want them to really understand the customer. I don't want them to find something that a machine can find. At the same time, I want to use machine learning to create a better curated experience for our customers in a way that humans can't. But it's ultimately about, I think, curating and concentrating and focusing the best value, which comes from the humans. So that's why I view machine learning and automation, is that it's about kind of focusing that effort so that you're getting the most out of your most valuable assets, which are the folks that work on your team.
Awesome.
So what was the original question again? Can you repeat it again, Jeremy?
Your opinion of the impact to the human aspects of machine learning and automation. So how an organization deals with that from a culture perspective.
I think that impact is positive, in my opinion, because people do more the work that is more interesting, etc. If you look, for example, at the QA teams, they shift from some boring, repetitive work to making more abstract things, to creating some frameworks to do automation, and I think people love it. So people in technology just love to learn and love to experiment. So I think it's a good thing.
And Spencer, did you have anything to add to that?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I'm torn in two directions. One of the directions is to think about the sci-fi and articles that I've read about autonomy, automation, and machine learning and AI. And I mean, it's something that in the cultural zeitgeist is extremely popular and is on everyone's minds. But then the other direction was, well, how does it affect my business, and how does it affect the day-to-day of my people? And I think the answers that have been given already are great. Maybe I would add, like, I don't know, within the context of a business, it seems like, and maybe the question was geared around, oh, what happens when automation upends the work of people in the business? What happens then? I think that's a pretty common sort of sentiment and question, I think, that we're wrestling with as a society, honestly. So I won't make any statements or any predictions there, but I think that in a business context, like, you automate what you can, and if you can hire engineers that can automate all those things, then you won't have to hire any more. And so it doesn't seem likely that, unless you're in a very large business, that it will super affect it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think it's also creating a range of new, positions and new roles, etc. So if we look at the Industrial Revolution, people were breaking machines because they thought they will lose their jobs. And look where we are. So things just become more interesting, and yeah, there is a lot of new things to do. So it's fine.
And for next question,
Jeremy, did you bring enough for all of us? The soda he drank, he didn't bring enough for everybody.
Oh,
I just have one.
Or Spencer, I mean. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good.
So if it is a performance issue, who brings it up to who to have those tough conversations? It's a question from Daryl.
Yeah, well, I think if you have performance issue in the team, for example, and if this is not naturally brought up to the surface during the regular team work. So something is wrong with this team, and you have more issues than just this concrete performance issue. So I think it's about making teams really, how can I put it, transparent, open, and people are smart. They know if they have performance issues. So, but if you're really in a situation that, you have performance issue, everybody is just silent about it, etc., then definitely bring it up.
Yeah, I think that goes back to psychological safety, honestly. I think if there's a performance issue, the sooner you bring it up, the better. And psychological safety doesn't mean you don't have hard conversations, and it doesn't mean that you're not direct, and it doesn't mean that you don't say things that need to be said that might be difficult. In fact, I think it means the opposite. I think it means that you're giving direct feedback frequently. I think it's a failure of management if a performance issue is brought up that's been happening for a long time and it's a surprise. This person should know, and they should be receiving coaching and training and whatever to either address the attitude problem or the aptitude problem, so that they can perform.
So it's kind of a faster iteration.
Yeah.
Oh, Spencer. That was the point you brought up earlier.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think early and often is really the key. I think developing emotional intelligence as a manager is something that is just so important in the workplace today. And honestly, when we're talking about careers and successful careers and things like that, I think that's a great differentiator as a manager, as someone who you're trying to level up in your career. Like, people love that, and they can notice that in you. And so that's one piece of advice I would give is, as you learn that and as you honestly market that emotional intelligence, that you are able to talk to people about hard things in a psychologically safe way. What better way to differentiate yourself?
And our next question, the person who is most resistant is often the one who's been around the longest, as we talked about earlier. Can you discuss other options you've used to overcome this, especially when that person is great at what they currently do?
Yeah, I think when you're driving change, it's really important to highlight folks that are doing it right, and to find champions and evangelists. So I think some ways that I've seen this work is take some of those folks that may be naysayers. In fact, on my team, I did exactly this. There was this gentleman that's been here on the team for a long time. We were moving to cross-functional teams, and he was very vocal about, oh, this is just going to increase silos. I spent time talking to him, understanding his concerns, trying to understand what he thought the risks were. We looked at some data. I had him read some things. He's now our biggest proponent. He's now the one that's driving it. So I think if they're true leaders and they really want to kind of move in that direction and achieve that vision, I think you can co-opt them and use them to drive the vision.
I think I agree with Michael, and I also want to point out something. So I think it's very important, if you have somebody who is resisting a change or giving any kind of resistance that is not desirable, that it's very important to understand why. So we should really build an empathic relationship with our employees. So sometimes you can also get surprised, because if you speak to somebody and if you really speak about that why, maybe you will discover that you have some blind spots. Maybe this person sees something that other people do not see, or reasons are completely personal and they just want to resist the change. But when you have this answer to why, it's very important. It's starting point for moving on. And as Michael mentioned, later this person can be actually somebody who is leading the change in the end, if you come to the same grounds.
Yeah. They also maybe in some cases may feel threatened by someone who's potentially younger, faster, newer, knows all the latest, greatest, hottest tech or whatever. I think that can definitely happen too, where it's a little bit of defensiveness just because they feel a little bit intimidated maybe by somebody on the team or the makeup of the team. In which case, I think, again, going back to Dragan, I think it's just understanding why they feel that way. And if you do, then I think it's fine to focus, say, listen, you might not know the next, minor version, what's included in the next minor version of a software package and how we can use it or something, but you do have this experience that we can leverage. And how can we balance your skills with other people's skills and really make it a win for them instead of kind of a comparison and it's a win or lose.
Yeah, because oftentimes they're the most passionate also. So
Right.
they may be resistors, but at the same time, they're often the most passionate. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, trying to kind of challenge them and channel them into being an advocate as opposed to a blocker. So we'll do one more question here. My company has had some challenges with implementing OKRs. The team understands the value, but it's become a burden or an afterthought. I would like to understand more about how to use impact mapping.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can explain in short terms. So impact mapping is about, understanding business goals, understanding who are the main actors to achieve the business goals, and what are deliverables that are related to that. And then what are the assumptions behind it? Once you have this map in place, then you validate assumption and you update it regularly. But how this is related to OKRs? So in the same way that OKRs have connection of each individual goal with company objectives and goals. Also with impact mapping, you have the goal of the product, you have then deliverables that will help to achieve these goals, and then you have individual assignments of teams. So here we are more talking about collective assignment, team assignment, rather than individual assignment, but in the organization you can easily relate this to people, personal plans, etc. So I think it's more simple, and it's just you can Google it. It's a simple technique that I think is very nice.
And one good thing about impact mapping is that it maps directly down ultimately to feature ideas, because you're like, if I can get this actor to have this behavior, I know it will impact this goal.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yes.
it kind of helps you focus your hypotheses around features.
Yeah. And it's dynamic, so you continuously validate assumptions behind. So impact mapping just accepts that goals are also something that, not goals, but basically our approach to achieving the goals is something that can be changed. Goals, of course, also, but and then if you want to connect it with teamwork, it also very nicely fits with user story mapping, which is another technique for agile teams to basically create their, let's say, backlog. But it fits nicely together because impact mapping is more on high level. It gets you to the level of deliverables that are pretty much, let's say, still abstract. And then you can combine this with user story mapping, which brings it down really to like product backlog items of teams.
It's very interesting. I'll have to look at that some more. So do you folks have any final thoughts you want to share with our audience before we wrap it up?
I think we're good.
Right.
No, I think that there's a lot of changes happening in the industry. I think everybody's trying to move towards outcomes, and I think there are ways that you can figure out if the company that you're interested in or if your company is really approaching this appropriately. And I think there's ways to be change agents to kind of drive some of these changes. But I think it's critical that we move to customer validated outcomes over outputs.
Mm. Yeah, if I can give one final thought after all that we discussed, I think that in general, we've also touched upon some techniques and approaches and things like that, but it's all about people. So whatever you want to achieve, just speak to people. So it's about transparency and openness. And after all years that I spent in my career, this is something that is always the true, so it's always about people and their happiness and basically being open to your team.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you folks for joining us for this. This has been really fun, really interesting. For those of you who asked questions, if we didn't get those answered, we'll be reaching out to you in the next couple of days. And as I said earlier, this was recorded, so this will be posted on our website soon. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Bye-bye.